The coffee mug shattered against the marble floor at 11:47 p.m. Adaeze didn't flinch. She had already been on her knees for 6 hours scrubbing the estate's kitchen tiles when the sound cracked through the corridor like a gunshot. She sat back on her heels, heart hammering, and listened. Nothing followed. No footsteps. No voice. Just the low hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of Seoul's nighttime traffic bleeding through the double-glazed windows 3 floors above her head. She pressed her palms flat against the cold floor and breathed. "Don't react," she whispered to herself. "Just don't react." That was the first rule Mrs. O had given her before she even stepped through the gate. 22-year-old Adaeze Obi, a Nigerian engineering student 3 months behind on rent, 3 weeks from academic probation, and 2 hours removed from watching her last stable income source, a small cafe near Hongdae, close its doors permanently. She had taken this housekeeping job with a desperation she didn't bother hiding, because she had nothing left to hide it with. Mrs. O had looked her over at the agency, with the tired eyes of someone who had seen too many people come and go from this particular estate. "The owner," Mrs. O had said slowly, choosing each word with surgical precision, "is a very private man. You clean, you cook if asked. You do not initiate conversation. You do not linger in rooms he occupies. And if he tells you to leave, you leave immediately. No questions, no hesitation." Adaeze had nodded. "One more thing," Mrs. O had lowered her voice. "Whatever you hear in that house, whatever you see, it stays inside that gate. Are we clear?" "Yes, ma'am." She hadn't asked why. She needed the money too badly to care about why. But now, kneeling on cold marble with a shattered mug somewhere down the corridor, and 3 floors of silence pressing down on her, she was beginning to understand that this job was going to ask things of her that no contract had ever mentioned. She stood, picked up her cleaning caddy, and walked toward the sound. The corridor stretched long and dim, lined with framed architectural sketches and a single row of recessed lights set so low they barely touched the floor. Adaeze moved carefully, her rubber soles silent against the marble. She found the shattered mug outside a set of heavy double doors at the end of the hall, the study, she knew, because Mrs. O had pointed at it specifically and said, "You never clean that room. Ever." The coffee had spread in a dark stain across the threshold. A clean ceramic handle lay separately, 3 feet away, as though it had been hurled rather than dropped. Adaeze crouched and began carefully collecting the shards. That was when she heard it. It wasn't a cry. It wasn't words. It was breathing, rapid, labored, wrong, the kind of breathing that didn't belong to a man in control of anything. It pushed through the gap beneath the double doors in shallow, panicked waves, and something about the sound reached past every professional boundary she had been given and grabbed her by the chest. She knew that sound. She had heard it before. In a different country, in a different room, sitting beside her grandmother during the last year of her life when the old woman's lungs and nerves conspired to betray her at the worst possible moments. Adaeze set down the broken ceramic. She placed her palm flat against the door and closed her eyes. "Sir," she said, keeping her voice low and even, "I'm not coming in. I just need you to hear me." The breathing stuttered. She took that as permission. "I'm going to breathe out loud," she said. "You don't have to do anything. You don't have to answer me. Just let my voice be in the room with you." She exhaled slowly. Long, controlled, deliberate. The kind of exhale her grandmother used to call giving the body something true to follow. She did it again. And again. 30 seconds passed. Maybe 40. She lost count. She just kept breathing, kept her voice at the edge of the door, kept herself a steady, quiet presence in the corridor, while Seoul hummed indifferently outside and the estate held its breath around her. The rapid, shallow sound behind the door began, almost imperceptibly, to slow. She exhaled once more, long and deep. And from behind the door, she heard him match it. His name was Ryu Yiwon. She learned that from the employment contract, not from him. 32 years old. CEO of Ryu Development Group, which owned a significant portion of commercial real estate in southern Seoul and had recently expanded into infrastructure projects across 3 other Asian markets. His photograph in the company's annual report showed a composed, sharp-jawed man in a charcoal suit, looking directly into the camera with the kind of controlled expression that cost years to perfect. The man she had heard behind that door sounded nothing like that photograph. She didn't see him until the third day. She was setting a breakfast tray on the garden table. Mrs. O had mentioned he occasionally took meals outside when she heard the glass door slide open behind her. She kept her back turned, busied herself adjusting the teacup, and waited. "You were in the corridor 2 nights ago." His voice was lower than she had expected. Flat, measured, not a question. "Yes, sir. You were supposed to leave after your shift." "I stayed to clean a spill." She turned then, because not turning felt more conspicuous than turning, and found him standing in the doorway wearing a plain gray shirt and trousers, his hair slightly disheveled, his eyes scanning her face with an expression she couldn't read. "The mug outside your study. I didn't want to leave ceramic shards on the marble overnight." Something moved across his face. Not quite recognition, more like recalculation. "You heard what was happening in that room." It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't embarrassment either. It was a statement delivered with the careful blankness of someone who had long since decided that controlling his own narrative was the only form of protection available to him. "I heard you needed a steady sound," Adaeze said, "so I gave you one." He looked at her for a long moment. "The agency said you were a student." "Engineering, 2nd year." "Why are you cleaning houses?" "Because engineering doesn't pay my rent yet." The faintest flicker of something, not quite a smile, but in the same territory, crossed the corner of his mouth. "Leave the breakfast tray," he said. "You can go back to your work." She picked up her caddy. She was almost back through the door when he spoke again. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for the other night." She nodded without turning. "Rest well, sir." She told herself it meant nothing. He was a client. She was there to keep his floors clean and his kitchen functional. The breathing through the door had been an instinct, not an invitation, and she would do well to remember that. But Ryu Yiwon had apparently not received the same internal memo. On the 5th day, he appeared in the kitchen doorway while she was preparing his evening meal and asked, without any preamble, whether her family was still in Nigeria. She looked up from the stove. "My parents are. My younger brother is here on a student visa." "Is he at the same university?" "Different campus. He's studying computer science." She watched him settle onto one of the kitchen stools with the slightly stiff manner of a man unaccustomed to sitting in casual spaces. "Do you have siblings?" He paused almost imperceptibly. "A younger sister. She lives in Vancouver now." "Do you see her often?" "No." She turned back to the stove and said nothing else. She had learned early in life that silence was sometimes the kindest response, that filling every pause with noise was a way of refusing to let people feel what they were actually feeling. After a moment, he said, "She used to call more often." Adaeze adjusted the flame and waited. "After our father died," he continued, and the evenness in his voice suggested enormous effort, "she decided that distance was easier than proximity. I think she was right. I was not easy to be around." "Loss does that," Adaeze said. "It turns people inward, sometimes so far inward they forget there's still a door." He was quiet for long enough that she wondered if she'd overstepped. "Our father built this company from almost nothing," he finally said. 40 years. When it came to me, I was 30. I had 230 employees, 4 ongoing projects, 11 board members who didn't believe I was ready, and no one to ask for help." He exhaled slowly. "The panic started 6 months after the funeral. I thought it would pass." "How long ago was that?" 2 years. She set a plate in front of him. Simple rice, braised vegetables, nothing heavy, and stepped back. "Did it pass?" "No," he said. "It got quieter for a while, but it never passed." She nodded. "Grief doesn't pass, it relocates." She met his eyes for the first time since the conversation started. "But it gets smaller than you, eventually." He looked at the food. Then he picked up the chopsticks and ate. She turned back to the sink and said nothing more. But her hands, submerged in warm water, were trembling slightly. Because the way he had looked at that plate before eating it, the way he had seemed almost surprised that someone had simply set food in front of him without expectation or ceremony, had reached somewhere under her ribs and pressed. She needed to be careful. The weeks folded into a rhythm she hadn't planned for and couldn't entirely explain. He began appearing in rooms she was cleaning, not in the hovering, uncomfortable way of someone checking her work, but in the wandering way of someone who had discovered that another person's quiet presence was less frightening than his own. He would bring a tablet and sit at the far end of the room and work. He would ask occasional questions about her studies, about her family in Enugu State, about what she missed most about home. She answered honestly, because there was something about the directness of his attention that made evasion feel unnecessarily complicated. One evening, she told him about the power cuts back home, how they had been so frequent in her childhood that her mother kept 3 different sizes of candles in the kitchen drawer, sorted by how long a given evening's blackout was expected to last. The shortest candles for brief outages, the tall ones for the nights that stretched past midnight with no warning and no end. He laughed, genuinely, a short, surprised sound, as if it had left his body before he could decide whether to allow it. She filed that sound away somewhere she couldn't quite name. He told her about the time he had missed his own company's launch event because he had locked himself in the building's fire exit stairwell for 40 minutes trying to breathe through a panic attack, while his assistant gave a speech that was never supposed to exist, improvised in real time, while Yiwon sat on a concrete step with his head between his knees. She didn't laugh. She said, "Did the assistant do well?" He blinked. "She actually did better than I would have." "Then in a way," Adaeze said, "your panic attack was her opportunity." He stared at her. Then quietly, he started to laugh again, the same surprised, unguarded sound, and this time it lasted longer, and she couldn't stop herself from smiling, and the garden between them felt suddenly very small. One afternoon, he asked her why she hadn't flinched the first night, why she had walked toward the sound instead of away from it. She thought about it for a moment before answering. "Because I've spent my whole life being told the world belongs to people who look a certain way, talk a certain way, come from a certain kind of place. And every time I tried to make myself smaller so I'd fit into those spaces, I lost something." She looked at her hands. "That night behind that door, you were just a person who needed someone to breathe with. You weren't a CEO. You weren't a problem I was paid to handle. You were just a person. And I know what it is to be just a person." He didn't say anything for a while. "Then, I've had 27 employees in this estate over the past 2 years. Every single one of them left within 3 months. Some were frightened. Some were uncomfortable. Most were simply indifferent." He looked out across the garden. "None of them came back for the pieces of a broken mug." "I wasn't coming back for the mug," she said quietly. He looked at her then, really looked, and neither of them said anything else for a long time. She should have seen it coming, but she was too busy managing the feeling to notice its direction of travel. The twist arrived in the form of a phone call she was never meant to hear. She was collecting garden chairs one morning when Yiwon's voice drifted through the open kitchen window, low, firm, the voice he used for the office. But the words cut through her like cold water. "She doesn't know who I am," he was saying. "She has no idea, and I need it to stay that way until I figure out how to tell her." Adaeze froze with a chair leg in each hand. "She thinks this is a normal estate. She thinks I'm a private CEO who avoids crowds. She doesn't know about the article." A pause. "Yes, that article, the one from last year, the one that made every staff member we've hired since refuse to sign their contract without a mental health clause." She set the chairs down very carefully and walked to the far end of the garden. Her hands had gone cold. She knew the article. She had read it in passing, a business news piece about executive mental health, about the stigma in Korean corporate culture, about one anonymous CEO who had reportedly required emergency intervention during a board meeting 2 years ago when he collapsed into a full dissociative episode in front of 11 executives and 3 international clients. The journalist hadn't named him, but the business world had guessed. Rumors had circulated for months. The story had been both a scandal And, quietly, a catalyst. The kind of article that forced a conversation an entire industry had been avoiding. She had read it on her phone in the cafe near Hongdae, before she lost that job, before any of this. She hadn't connected it to him. She stood at the edge of the garden and looked at the city and thought, with great and terrible clarity, he has been afraid this whole time that knowing the full truth of what happened would make me pull away. And I have been afraid that he would never trust me enough to tell me. And we have both been circling the same center of gravity like two people too cautious to land. When he came outside, she was still standing at the garden's edge, her back to him. Adaeze. I know about the article, she said, not harshly, just clearly. Silence. I read it months ago, she continued. Before I came here, I didn't know it was you, but I know now. She turned. His face had gone very still. And I need you to hear me when I say it changes nothing, not one single thing. He looked at her for a long time. I was going to tell you, he said finally. I just didn't know how to say it without it becoming the only thing you saw when you looked at me. It won't be, she said. It isn't. He exhaled, long, slow, the kind of breath she recognized. She had taught him that. The board meeting changed the rest. Rumors spread among the staff. Board members questioned why the CEO spent increasing time at the estate. One reportedly used the word distraction. Another used a phrase the groundskeeper repeated carefully, inappropriate attachment to domestic staff. Not wanting to become a liability to a man who was only just learning how to breathe, Adaeze submitted her resignation 4 days before her contract ended. She wrote it on plain paper with a borrowed pen. Thank you for reminding me that even the most guarded hearts are still capable of growth. I hope you find the rest you have been fighting for. I hope it comes easier now. Adaeze. She left the note on the kitchen counter, beside his morning coffee. She was gone before he woke up. She found work at a small cafe near Sinchon, jazz on weekend afternoons. University students nursing single Americanos for 3 hours without complaint. It was quieter than she needed it to be. The kind of quiet that left room for thinking she didn't want to do. Her brother called one evening, while she was closing up. You look terrible, Chitty said, squinting at her through the video call. What happened? Nothing happened. Ada, he used the shortened name the way their mother did, packed with everything left unsaid. Something happened. I left a job. A job or a person. She wiped down the counter and didn't answer. You know, Chitty said carefully, there's no version of this story where running away is the part you'll look back on with pride. I wasn't running away. I was being responsible. Responsible people don't fold laundry at midnight, he said. I know you. That's what you do when something is bothering you. You clean things. You make things orderly. Because the thing you can't fix is too big to look at directly. She set down the cloth. What am I supposed to do, Chitty? Stay and watch his board use me as ammunition against him. Watch him fight harder for his company's confidence than he would ever fight for. She stopped. For what? Her brother said softly. She locked the cafe door and stood in the dark of the empty front room with the jazz still barely audible through the speaker she hadn't turned off yet. He needs to want it for himself, she finally said. Not because I'm standing there making it easier. Chitty was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said, that's probably true. Then, but Ada, sometimes the bravest thing isn't walking away so someone can grow. Sometimes the bravest thing is staying to find out if they already have. She turned off the lights and went home and thought about that for 12 days straight. 2.5 weeks later, on a gray Tuesday morning, the cafe door opened at 9:14 a.m. and Ryu Yiwon walked in. No driver, no assistant, no suit, dark trousers and a simple navy coat, his hair slightly less controlled than any version of him she had seen before. He looked like a man who had made a decision and was committed to not overthinking it. He sat down at the counter. She stood across from him and said nothing. He picked up the small laminated menu, read it, set it down. I've been seeing a therapist, he said. She felt something open quietly in her chest. 3 sessions, he continued. It's not easy. She asks questions I don't know how to answer yet. He looked up. But I'm learning how to sit with not knowing. That's the hardest part, Adaeze said. Yes, he held her gaze. I also spoke to the board. I told them that I will not be accepting guidance on my personal life from people whose job description does not include my personal life. He paused. 2 of them were unhappy. The other 9 seemed relieved to have it said plainly. She leaned against the counter. And what did you want to tell me? He was quiet for a moment, measuring the weight of his next words carefully. The morning I found your note, he said, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. I told myself it was better this way, cleaner, that you were right to go. He turned the menu over in his hands. But the house was the same silence as before you arrived, and I had forgotten what that silence felt like until it came back. Adaeze said nothing. She waited. I don't want to ask you to be anything you haven't chosen to be, he said. I don't want to fill your life with something you didn't sign up for, but I want to try, with you, if you'll let me try. She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had shattered a coffee mug in the middle of the night and breathed through a panic attack on the other side of a closed door. This man who had laughed, surprised and unguarded, at a story about Nigerian power cuts. This man who was sitting in a small cafe near Sinchan without a driver or a suit or a single layer of the armor. She had watched him slowly and carefully lay down, piece by piece, over weeks of shared meals and quiet evenings. One condition, she said. He waited. You keep going to therapy, not for me, for yourself, because you deserve to have the tools, not just the company. Agreed, he said immediately. And you eat real meals, not untouched refrigerator food. Something warm moved through his expression. Also agreed. Then yes, she said, we can try. She poured him a coffee and set it on the counter. He wrapped both hands around the cup the way she had noticed he always did when something mattered, as if the warmth helped him stay inside his own body. Outside, Seoul moved through its gray morning with the indifferent energy of a city that never waited for anyone. But inside the small cafe, something shifted, quietly, without announcement, the way real things tend to shift. Epilogue. 8 months later, Adaeze finished her final engineering exams with marks that surprised even her professor. Yiwon attended therapy every week and had begun speaking quietly and publicly about anxiety in professional spaces. The first time he did it, his assistant cried. The estate's garden held a long wooden table and 2 chairs where they ate breakfast on mornings when both of them had time. The blackout curtains came down. The estate, once silent and fortress-like, filled with music, laughter, and the particular warmth of a home that had finally decided what it wanted to be. On the morning, she moved the last of her things into the house, not as an employee, but as someone who had earned a different kind of key. Yiwon stood in the garden doorway and watched the early light come through the trees. People spent years trying to figure out what this house was missing, he said. Adaeze set down her bag. What did they think it was? Better furniture, better art. He turned to look at her. They were wrong. She walked to the garden table and sat down in the chair that had become, without either of them formally deciding it, hers. Come eat, she said. The food is getting cold. He sat down across from her. Seoul woke up around them, bright and unhurried, and the garden held them both in the soft, particular quiet of a life that had finally found its shape. Some people come into your life like a storm. Others come like steady breathing in a dark corridor, quiet, consistent, and exactly what you didn't know you needed. He had a mansion. She had nothing but instinct and courage. And somehow, that had been exactly enough. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that healing happens one steady breath at a time, hit that like button right now and leave a comment below. Tell me, which moment hit you hardest? The corridor, the garden, or the coffee cup at the end? I read every single comment. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. New videos drop every week, and the next one is one you will not want to miss. See you there.